You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Evening all. It's been the hottest day of the year so far apparently. So welcome to another episode of Skills World Live. And boy, have we got a hot show lined up for you tonight. Just when you thought we'd already climbed the dizzy heights of competing with your local hospital radio, the quality of the guests that keep on wanting to come on this show is generating a ratings bonanza. Not even Andrew Neil, Michael Portillo or Diane Abbott could muster when they used to regularly appear on the Beeb's now defunct weekly politics show. And talking of politics, we've got the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills in England back on this evening, sharing a little exclusive about the future of apprenticeship frameworks. At least it was an exclusive, folks, before some eagle-eyed pen pusher at the ESFA pressed send on an email to all and sundry, thereby depriving me of the opportunity of bragging. You heard it here first. Not to worry, in the cruel world of FE sector media, you win some, you lose some. There's still a lot more novelty left in us yet, though, as this only community radio show continues to dedicate my dulcet tones to connecting the world of FE. On tonight's show, we're back in the world of English apprenticeships. It was only Monday of this week when the gregarious toddler of a 3-year-old, the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and yes, I know, it's a very long title, but they did close 2 of their extended consultations this week. The first one was looking at the future of the funding bands, and the second looked into the streamlining of what many in the sector see as the Wild West of external quality assurance. That's right, folks. There are nearly 300 endpoint assessment organisations, or EPAOs, that have piled into the market in just 2 years. And whereas schools, colleges and independent training providers make do with one quality inspectorate, Ofsted, some bright policy wonk in sanctuary buildings thought it would be a great idea to let loose 18, that's right, 18, uncoordinated quality bodies, rather affectionately known as EQAPs. And if you're now struggling to keep up with all these English acronyms, IFATE, EQAPs and EPAOs, then you won't have to suffer for very much longer, because the Skills World Live editor, Gavin O'Mara, has assembled his almanac of just the right expert contributors you were all looking for. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. After the news, on Thank a Teacher Day, we'll be hearing directly from the Minister, Gillian Keegan, about the teacher that inspired her to seek out a skilled apprenticeship. I'll be chewing over the fat with the former British Army Personnel Director and present-day Institute of Apprenticeships Chief Oppo, Rob Neach, about what quality assurance and funding of apprenticeships might look like when the pandemic-related national emergency is finally over. And joining me and Rob in that debate will be Mark Armitage, the endpoint assessment guru at IMI, the Institute of the Motor Industry. In the middle segment of the show, I'll be talking to practitioner experts in quality, the very people who are tasked day in and day out to ensure apprentices get the world-class experience ministers have been promising them for decades. And in the closing segment of the show, the mercury on the independent training provider temperature gauge could reach boiling point as that seasoned skills campaigner and boss of the ALP, Mark Daw, shares his views on what should happen to FE and skills in future. But first, let's find out what's making the news headlines in your skills world this evening. Ministers in England are under pressure from teacher representatives and unions not to open some educational settings from the 1st of June. At least 11 local councils are resisting the opening of primary schools for reception years 1 and 6 pupils. The unions say that it is not currently safe to allow pupils back in schools until their safety concerns are addressed. Meanwhile, academies have the power to make their own decisions about reopening, and some FE college leaders have also said they will use their own judgments when following the Department for Education's 15,000-word revised guidance published last week. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland currently have no plans to reopen schools from the start of next month. In other news, the Apprenticeship and Skills Minister Gillian Keegan has told this programme that she did not approve the request from the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education to delay switching off apprenticeship frameworks on the 31st of July. There had been widespread speculation in the sector that the old frameworks would be extended for at least another year due to the pandemic. But the Minister told Skills World Live that the provider base was put on notice about the planned handover to new apprenticeship standards in October 2018 and that 75% of all apprenticeships were already on the new standards, she said. And finally, the Welsh Government has published today its resilience plan for post-16 learning. The document sets out how the Welsh Government will work with colleges, universities and training providers to help ensure that learners are supported throughout the pandemic. The plan is aimed at education for learners aged 16 and over, including further and higher education, apprenticeships, employability and adult learning. Ken Skates, the Welsh Assembly Government Minister, will be appearing on one of these future programmes to discuss how the Welsh Government will implement COVID-related recovery plans. That's all your Skills World news from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Bewick, @FENews. Use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111. Welcome back to Skills World Live. To kick off tonight's discussions, I'm delighted to be joined by the Minister for Skills and Apprenticeships in England, Gillian Keegan. Minister, thanks for coming back on the programme.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Now, today is National Thank a Teacher Day. As the father of 3 kids, let me go first by thanking Mr. Harold, who is the head teacher of my son's secondary school in Brighton and Hove, Blatchington Mill. He's done a great job throughout this crisis, regularly communicating with parents and being very honest with us, actually, about the many challenges both he and his teaching staff face. Who, Minister, would you like to thank today?
Well, I'd like to thank a teacher from way back when I was at school, Mr. Ashcroft, who actually stayed behind every night from 3:30 to 5:30 for 2 years to teach me engineering and technical drawing, because at that time, believe it or not, girls were not allowed to take that option. Right. And I wanted to take it. So he stayed behind for 2 of us, actually, 2 girls. And as a result of that, I ended up very much interested in technology, in maths, in engineering and technical drawing. And yeah, I want to thank him, because when I think now, extraordinary sacrifice that he did that a couple of nights a week for 2 years to help me to do a bunch of extra GCSEs that I wouldn't have got to do otherwise. So I'd like to thank him. And then, of course, all the teachers all across the country who are just doing their best, really, to switch to online learning. And I think they're doing an amazing job in most cases to really engage children in a medium, that they weren't used to working with a couple of months ago.
Yeah, big shout out there then for Mr. Ashcroft, inspiring teacher. Do you think he knew then that you would end up in the dizzy heights of Her Majesty's government as a minister responsible for education and skills?
No, but he would have been delighted. Unfortunately, he died not long after I became an MP, but he did know I became an MP, which I think actually shocked him. I think probably my 30-year business career, which was, I started off in a car factory as a 16-year-old apprentice. That would have been something he definitely was instrumental in and would have imagined. I guess where I've ended up with, you couldn't really plot your way from there to being Minister for Apprenticeship and Skills. Sure. So no, guess you'd be surprised, as everybody else is.
Well, look, it's a great reminder, isn't it, Minister, of the impact that teachers have. Now, of course, it wouldn't have escaped, though, your attention that the department's guidance to reopen educational settings, including schools, sixth forms and colleges, is not without its critics. I mean, what do you say to those teacher representatives like the unions who are concerned about the safety of their members and pupils in, as they may see it, a rush back to reopening schools and colleges?
Well, I think there's no doubt, and I have a great deal of sympathy with anybody that has, a view that, we're stepping back, we're taking baby steps into reopening aspects of our school and aspects of our economy. And it's much harder to do that than the simple stay-at-home message. I mean, that one, whilst it's difficult to take away liberties and freedoms, it's been a very simple message and quite simple to adhere to. Taking baby steps back into what our new normal is going to be a lot more difficult. So I have a lot of sympathy. Everybody has their own individual circumstances. People are more fearful. Some people are more fearful than others. So I understand the fear. However, I think it's very important because every action there is consequence. And, the staying at home does not come without consequences. We know that our children now and young people have been out of education for many, many weeks. And we know that has a massive impact on them. And we go to school for a reason. We go to college for a reason. And whilst they've done a great job, and everybody's done a great job to move as much online as possible, we all know that it isn't a substitute for education. So we have to start that journey back. Yeah. And what we're saying is we have to make sure that the R rate is below 0, below 1. We've still got all of the 5 tests that have to be met. But what we're saying is start to make a plan. And I can't see any reason why, because we're going to have to use these plans, whether it's, on the 1st of June or the 2nd of June or, whenever it is for different age groups, for different types of institutions. Yeah. We are going to have to reopen schools, and we're going to have to do that in a
phased way, I think, as the government said.
Yeah, and you don't have all the information. You do not have perfect information, and that's the difficulty.
I mean, you've been a real champion for 16 to 19 apprentices as well, and ensuring that they're written into the guidance. I mean, are you expecting, for example, these practical observations and endpoint assessments, insofar as they can take place, are you expecting to see apprentices now then complete from June the 1st?
Yes,
many
I
have been
so.
already, of course, but
I think so. I mean, obviously what we've got with a lot of the qualifications is some of them are going to be calculated anyway. Some of them will be assessed in a remote way, and some of them will be delayed. So as more of those as we can get assessed and use the equipment that obviously we have in FE colleges, sometimes that's necessary to complete, licenses to practice, etc. Then, of course, we've offered that flexibility to colleges. And from what I've seen with colleges, they've shown great leadership throughout this period. They have, I think, been outstanding in terms of how much they've done online. And I've joined many virtual online classes, and they really are very interactive. They're super engaging, actually. And I think they're a platform that we'll use a lot more in the future because it works very well. Good. But they all know that, supplementing that with face-to-face teaching and with specific tuition and specific uses of equipment that you only find in colleges is absolutely vital as well. Yeah. So we expect them to use the flexibility they've had and continue to show the leadership they have.
Okay, well, tonight's show is all about taking forward the quality agenda in apprenticeships, and I'll be talking to the Institute for Apprenticeships shortly. And at the end of the programme, ALP will be giving us their perspective on the reforms. What's your vision for improving the quality of apprenticeships and delivering on the Secretary of State's stated aims of an English apprenticeship and technical educational model that's seen internationally as better than Germany's by 2030?
With T levels and some of the other changes we're making on apprenticeships, I think we've got the building blocks to really reform technical education in this country, and businesses are crying out for it. And we know that, career-led study, which I like to call apprenticeships, is what I always referred to mine. It's a way of studying that is much more closely linked to your career and to employability and to your employment. And I think that's something that this country really wants. I think many parents want it, many young people want it. And, we have the ability to really build on some of those reforms to have the best technical education system. Why not? Why do we not have that capability? We've got some of the best companies, we've got some of the best research, some of the best science, some of the best teaching. We can extend that to technical education.
Okay.
So I'm very, very, optimistic about that. And it's absolutely vital, because every young person deserves a quality opportunity, whether that's an apprenticeship, whether they do a T-level, whether they go, and do the traditional route. They deserve a quality experience, because they don't get to do that experience again.
No. Now, obviously, got a decade as well to achieve that objective of leapfrog in Germany. But one of the criticisms that has been levelled at the current quality assurance system in apprenticeships is that there are arguably too many bodies, like the 18 or so external quality assurance providers, all doing different things to inconsistent standards. Are you and the government still committed to the recommendation in the Institute's recent consultation that only Ofqual and the Office for Students should lead, with oversight of IFATE, on the quality assurance of apprenticeships in future?
Well, I think it's very important that we get the quality assurance right. And, we have obviously started this new, the standards and the endpoint assessment and the organisations. We have to look at what's working, look at what we need to continue to focus on and what we can improve, and still open to looking at the various options in terms of how we can improve. But of course, the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education has played a vitally important role working with the employers, who ultimately will be the arbiters of quality and whether we get this right. So, we have to make sure the whole system works to deliver that quality. And that really is going to be judged by the employability of young people.
Okay. Finally, I just wondered if you could share with our listeners whether the decision has been made to extend the frameworks for a year, as the deadline, 31st of July, when they're meant to be switched off, is fast approaching.
We have confirmed that we will not be extending the deadline. We'll stick to the time of the 31st of July. Right. And the reason we've done that is taken a very practical approach as well, because, we've obviously done a lot of work on the standards. The standards are all in place. 75% of all apprenticeships are now on standards. And when we've looked at those that aren't, in pretty much every area, every sector, there are examples of people who've moved to standards. So we've given, I think it was October 2018 when we gave notice. Right, so this, it's been a very, very long, running to do this. Now, as always, sometimes some organisations might leave some things to the last minute, etc. But we believe that the standards are in place. There's 539 of them. They're there, and therefore we're confident about switching off the frameworks and improving the quality of apprenticeships. And, these are important steps to make sure that we do that.
Gillian Keegan, Minister for Skills and Apprenticeships in England. Thanks for joining me this evening. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. So you heard the Minister there, sounding pretty emphatic that she and colleagues at the Department for Education want to press on with the reforms. And to think that was a journey that started by the former Dragon's Den entrepreneur nearly 8 years ago. Which is why on tonight's Big Debate, we're exploring the question of how we continue to improve the quality of English apprenticeships, and crucially, how do we put them on a more secure financial footing for the future? And who better to continue tonight's Big Debate than two gentlemen who know a thing or two about continuous quality improvement. Joining me on the line is Rob Neach, whose illustrious career in the British Army saw him take on challenges in places as far-flung as Brunei and Nepal. And of course, he's affectionately known to many of our listeners as the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Apprenticeships. Good evening, Rob.
Hey, hi Tom, thanks for having me on.
No, you're welcome. Now, I'm so pleased also to introduce another skills colleague, Mark Armitage, who is driving change, and that's his pun, not mine, at the 100-year-old Institute of the Motor Industry, and he's also their head of membership products and services. Good evening, Mark.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Rob. Good to speak with you both today.
Great. Well, thanks to both of you too for joining Skills World Live this evening. Rob, let's start with you. I'm not sure, I don't think you had a chance to listen to the whole interview there with Minister Gillian Keegan, but she was pretty clear that frameworks needed to be switched off on the pre-planned date of July the 31st, and that in general terms she's pretty anxious actually to press on with the external quality assurance reforms. Does the Institute have the same sense of urgency about this, particularly given how occupied you've been, understandably, having to deal with COVID-related flexibilities to the existing apprenticeship programme?
Well, thanks, Tom. I mean, we are really keen to see apprenticeships being delivered now, but also to make sure that we do continue to develop the system and the processes for the future. And in fact, we're learning a lot of things at the moment which are helping us to do that. In terms of framework turn-off, we work closely with the department on a number of issues. The Institute has always been keen to see standards as the single apprenticeship offer, and I think that they've been generally thought of as being high quality. I know the Minister weighed the decision carefully, and the decision's been made, and we really look forward to an environment in which standards are the single apprenticeship offer in England.
Okay. Mark, on your LinkedIn profile, you talked about how much you believe in continuous improvement across systems and processes. I mean, tell us honestly, in your opinion, do you believe currently we have the most optimal approach to external quality assurance in apprenticeship?
Well, leading an EPAO that's kind of dealing across 4 different EQAPs, I think you referred to them earlier, Tom.
Affectionately, of course.
Affectionately, of course. Then sure, it brings its challenges around consistency, and I know that Rob and his team have been trying to make a lot of changes there, which we welcome as a customer of theirs. We do have some delays and some challenges when there are multiple people involved with many things when you're trying to improve systems and processes. But yeah,
not sure we still got you, Mark. Is the signal still coming in loud and clear? You still there? Anyway, hopefully, Rob, you heard a bit of that. I mean, you've obviously had to pull off a Herculean effort,
with
Rob.
all the other EPAOs
he's back.
Mark,
you're back. We lost you there for about 20 seconds, so I'm just going to bring Rob in. Try and move to a place in your house where you've got the strongest possible signal. I don't want you to do anything dangerous like on the roof or anything. But Rob, I mean, you've pulled off a Herculean effort really with your team at the Institute just to frankly keep the show on the road, and you've been working through standards where you can grant flexibilities, and obviously there are just some standards that you just haven't been able to do that because of the nature of those particular practical observations or those apprenticeships. I mean, just give us a flavour of just how challenging it has been actually for you the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't like to single the Institute out as
sure. Everybody's been working hard across the
I think massive credit is due to absolutely everybody, and I think it's been good to be part of such a team effort and so focused on trying to help apprentices get through apprenticeships, to start apprenticeships, and also to meet the needs of employers. And it has been a big effort. We're very grateful to all the work that the external quality assurance providers have done, as well as the endpoint assessment organisations. And the work's not done yet, and we're continuing to do it. We've got a series of task forces that are continuing to look at where we can introduce further flexibilities or dispensations of method to deal with the current operating circumstances, which clearly weren't envisaged at the time that the standards and the endpoint assessment plans were approved.
Sure. I mean, it's just amazing how much the world has changed across the whole post-16 system just over the last 8 weeks, never mind 8 months or 8 years. I mean, it just feels like a whole decade worth of change has had to come at once. I mean, how much, you indicated there, obviously, some of the processes you've got internally at the Institute to review the way in which quality assurance and endpoint assessment is being done. Looking forward then, I mean, how much, Rob, do you think you'll keep of sort of, the flexibilities and the decisions you've already made, and what, I don't want to say flip back, because that suggests we're sort of going back to a world, frankly, that doesn't exist anymore. So I'm also going to talk about moving forward. But what's your assessment on that piece?
So thanks, Tom. And I mean, just to sort of, for any listeners that may not be aware, the sort of scale is that we've made over 100, I think it's 106 as of today, adjustments to EPA to facilitate the continuance of apprenticeships. or the continuance of endpoint assessment.
Yeah.
Some of the innovation that we've seen, and it's definitely accelerated the innovative process, in particular around remote practices, have actually strengthened what's being delivered. And as we go forwards in this process, we're determined to retain that betterment. So I think what I would expect to see at a position at which it becomes sensible to start to potentially unwind some of the flexibilities is actually we won't be unwinding those which have taken us forwards. And certainly we've learned a lot about accessibility and how we can do better with that. So we're actually monitoring the impact of the assessments at the moment. Firstly, the flexibilities at the moment. Firstly, to ensure that we're continuing to maintain quality, because that's been a guiding principle in the way that we've looked at the potential for flexibilities, but also to detect those that are actually working better than what we had in place. So at the end of this, we would hope that where there has been something that's really strengthened the system, that we've learnt that and we embed it, and actually so the whole thing becomes better going forwards.
Okay, well, hopefully we can bring now Mark. Are you still there with us? Have you got a stronger signal, hopefully?
Yeah, and I'm not on the roof, so
that's very good to know.
Nice to do it safely.
But, the IMI can't lose a very important endpoint assessment expert. Now, Mark, I mean, in terms of sort of how we're measuring quality in the system, and by this I mean, for example, and there are many ways, obviously, but achievement rates. I mean, do you think, given that we've sort of inherited a legacy system, which was part of the frameworks approach to measuring quality in the apprenticeship model, do you think achievement rates are currently, as they constitute the right way of looking at providers and whether they're delivering quality or not? Because I mean, it's down to what, 2%, I think, on average, just above the intervention rate, where effectively the ESFA could close a provider down.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to do the same measure for a different product.
Yeah,
you've got a product now that's got a very greater emphasis on the employer as well. Frameworks, yes, there's the employer engagement, but actually with standards, they take a far larger part of the delivery model. So I think you've got a lot more dynamics there than you had before. So I think it would be difficult to keep the same measure.
Right. Okay. So what would you sort of want to put in its place potentially then, Mark? Do you think?
Rather than achievement rates?
Yeah. I mean, given that obviously the whole point of endpoint assessment is most will pass, but some inevitably will fail because they don't have the threshold competence. I mean, should we move to perhaps more of a measure like that, or is there still a place for something back in the gateway to look at, the extent to which people get that far in the programme?
I think recognising somebody that's got through to the gateway situation's really, really useful. Yeah. You've got people there that are on their way in a career. They started the journey at least 12 months ago in most cases. So to be able to still be going strong at that point's got to be recognised, I think, most definitely. And we certainly kind of provide gateway certification locally to recognise individuals' performance.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a distance travelled thing, isn't it? Rob, I mean, have you got a perspective on that? And again, I suppose it comes back to this broader question about what is quality, how are we measuring quality, how might that change in the future, particularly given obviously you've got this consultation now that's just completed and you'll be working your way through that, I'm sure, with colleagues and with colleagues at Ofqual and OFS as well, and with others, about what the quality assurance model should look like in future.
Yes, so just to deal with the consultation, that was looking at the transition arrangements rather than specifically the system. Yeah. But returning to the system, Tom, or the concept of quality, I think the most important thing is we do understand it as a system. And as you've indicated, there are multiple facets to quality. And we need to make sure that we're sampling and looking at all those aspects. There's the quality of teaching. There's making sure that people are getting the quantity of teaching that should have been provided. So I would be advocating a broad approach to considering quality. And as you'll be aware yourself, the Institute does lead this the Quality Alliance, which is seeking to impose a or has developed a quality plan that should bring forward some of the changes that will develop a stronger system and one that delivers better for employers and apprentices.
Sure. I mean, part of the plans going forward to involve Ofqual and the Office for Students more as two statutory bodies in relation to external quality assuring the standards, obviously Ofqual broadly up to the degree level, and then the OFS taking over at level sort of 6 and above. I mean, do you think regulators of qualifications like Ofqual really understand that there is a difference between quality assurance and what you might call traditional regulation of qualifications?
I think Ofqual are trying very hard to do that, and I think they're very committed to our framework. You know, we've worked on it together. They've been part of the part of the group that's developed it, and that particularly brings quality assurance to life. And certainly, we will be working with Office for Students and Ofqual to make sure that that's what we deliver.
Okay. Mark, I've only got sort of 25 seconds, unfortunately, but just final word to you. I mean, you know, do you, on that point about Ofqual, do you think they understand the difference between regulation of you as an AO and effectively in the future quality assuring you, as indeed they may do now for some of your standards, quality assuring you for the apprenticeship output?
They do that now, yes. So we deal with them for both as an AO for qualifications and also as an EPAO.
And do you find any difference
standards
in the way they talk to you, deal with you, and dare I say regulate you as a result?
No, it's quite standardised, which as an AO and EPAO, that's a lot more straightforward to operate with.
Okay, so you welcome that standardisation by the sounds of it.
Without doubt, you know, it needs to be more standardised. It'll make everybody's journey a lot easier, I think.
Okay, well, on that note of consistency and standardisation, Rob Neach, Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and Mark Armitage at the Institute for the Motor Industry. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Great, thanks Tom.
Cheers.
Thanks, Rob.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
From Waterloo to Amsterdam, we'll be a little heaven.
And not surprisingly, that track is called Little Heaven by Curio with Pauline Froling. Selected, of course, from the Skills World Live team's independent music site of choice, epidemicsound.com. Now, look, to continue tonight's big debate, which is all about quality, future of apprenticeships, including the funding. Who better to get on the show than Louise Doyle, who's the co-founder of MESMA. She's going to tell me what that acronym means in a minute. But she's a quality expert and SDN strategic associate, and she focuses a lot on quality. Good evening, Louise.
Good evening, Tom. It's good to be here.
Good. And joining us in this three-way debate on the programme, we've got Tracy Matthews, who's the head of apprenticeships at Milton Keynes College. Good evening, Tracy.
Good evening. Nice to be here.
Great. And you sound, by the sounds of it, fingers crossed, I don't want to jinx it, you've got reasonably good, strong lines as well coming in to the studio.
Why did you have to say that?
I know. I really shouldn't have said that. Louise, starting with you. I mean, from a quality in apprenticeships perspective, what are the concerns that arguably keep you awake at night?
So I always think it's important that when we're talking about quality in apprenticeships, we kind of start by talking about how complex they are to deliver.
Yeah.
You know, in my view, they're the hardest bit of the education system to get right. And actually, as we move towards T levels, we'd be wise to learn from that. Mm-hmm. So I see lots of apprenticeship provision. I see it at level 2, I see it at level 7, I see it with existing staff, I see it with new staff. And actually, there's no pattern to that about what's really high quality and what's really low quality. And sometimes I think that gets in the way of the debate. But there are a few things we need to deal with. So we know that we need to focus, I think, more on retention and completion and get away from the bin counting of starts, which I think has got in the way at times over the last few years.
Okay.
We've got an Ofsted trend whereby our provision, approximately 50% of it year on year, so that's provision, not providers, it is not yet good. And I think particularly in light of the Sutton Trust report that came out today, I'd like to start hearing more from QAA. So there are things within the system, and that's whether it's quality governance, whether it's from a provider point of view, whether or not it's from an employer point of view, that I think we can deal with in order to improve that. But I suspect you'll ask me about that, so I won't say any more at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and also let's bring Tracy in. I mean, Tracy, you're very clearly very focused on delivering quality apprenticeship training and experience for your students at Milton Keynes College. So
absolutely.
From a provider delivery perspective then, what frustrates you most about the current quality assurance model? And to be fair, I think Louise actually was listing quite a few concerns that she has as a quality expert. But what really impacts you, at the front line of actually trying to deliver that quality experience for your students?
I think I would try and summarise it in a couple of points. I think listening to Mark talking about the endpoint assessment process, I think as a provider, the lack of clarity with some EPAOs and standards as to the definition between the different pass grades, pass, merit and distinction, trying to pin down EPAOs to give guidance on the difference between a distinction and a pass, it is in some cases nigh on impossible. And when we want to aim for to say to our employers that their apprentice is going to go through with a specific grade, we need that clarity and guidance in order that we're giving the right information and advice, and that still isn't there. We have it with some standards, but it is not consistent across the piece.
I mean that word consistency just seems to come up the whole time whenever you get into any sort of debate about English apprenticeships, quality assurance. I mean, whether it's about the 18 EQAPs and their relationship with nearly 300 EPAOs, whether it's about the 300 EPAOs and their relationship with, northwards of 1,500 odd providers, which obviously includes colleges in that as well. I mean, where have we gone wrong then, Tracy, do you think, in terms of how we've tried to implement what obviously on paper sounded like a great idea, but it sounds like in practice we've still got a lot of teething problems, and you're indicating that as someone at the front line, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think if we look at other qualifications in the further education space, we will receive a specification manual, and it will be clear that for a student to pass with a distinction, this is what they are going to be looking for, whether it's a range or whether it's whatever it is. And so, actually, as a tutor, if you're working with students, you can mark their work and you can feed back and you can say to them, you're working at a merit. In order to get a distinction, you need to do this, this and this. And obviously we want to replicate that in apprenticeship world. And so I think that when a standard is launched and when there is an assessment plan, my plea would be that the criteria that determines the difference between the pass, merit and distinction should automatically be with it in the same way that it would a qualification. Now, I may be oversimplifying things, but that simplistically for me would be a really good start.
Louise, how do you think we tackle this consistency point that Tracy's talking about there? I mean, she obviously profiled an example where, a very established market of qualifications, regulated qualifications provided by AOs. Obviously, over the years, they have been able to build up those detailed specifications. Some of them are obviously able to do that if they're also EPAOs. I mean, is this just a symptom of a immaturity of the market? I mean, as I said at the top of the show, there are 300 EPAOs. Many of them seem to have piled in relatively, in the last few months in some cases, and some even, I was looking at the list earlier today, I mean, include universities. And that sort of suggests to me, are they, as both providers and so-called endpoint assessors, kind of marking their own homework potentially? Does that concern you?
Sure. Yeah, so the point that you mentioned there, not so much actually on the university front. So just giving that as an example, I think what I'll do is I'll come back from the points that Tracy's made, and pick up, I think, more about the journey before endpoint assessment. All of what Tracy said, of course, is extremely important. So, and I think it's interesting when you look at where we are today, with the decision the Minister spoke about earlier on, not to extend frameworks.
Yeah. So, do you think that was the right decision, by the way?
Well, I think it was. How long do you keep changing it for? And actually, I think there are some points that she makes that are valid within it. I make the assumption that has been done with knowing the potential unintended consequences that might sit underneath it. Right. But it's the decision that's been made, so we've got to go with that, and we can't change it. But actually, whether it's framework or standards, and this is kind of the most important bit of it to me, is, and I think this should keep people confidence rather than lacking confidence, is the quality apprenticeship on frameworks and standards. Actually, the same things come through. So what you find in a good apprenticeship is good contracting with the employer, with clear accountabilities. You have really strong initial assessment taking place, not just done as a tick box because the SFA says you've got to do it, but actually is really about driving the quality of the programme. You have really strong tripartite reviews taking place throughout it, and you have extremely strong curriculum design. And now, where standards are concerned, and it's about that preparation for EPA, as Tracy has very well explained. So we've got to get all of those dimensions right. And the data that we've got at the moment is suggesting that we aren't getting there yet. So whilst the Minister, and I understand why, and I support it completely, that the standards are, in principle, a good product, they're only as good as the delivery that takes place within them.
Sure.
So there's got to be some priming within the system to make sure that those providers who perhaps are making that transition now, or who have struggled, and there are those that have struggled, are able to get those dimensions right. Which comes back to the complexity issue again, doesn't it, Tom? They're not easy to do.
No, they're not. And Tracy, I mean, Louise made a statement there that's saying that standards are only as good as the delivery. And looking forward, obviously, in this challenge that we're in, educational settings are starting to reopen or will be shortly, and that includes, obviously, for apprentices. What would you like to see happen from a delivery perspective then over the next few months to try and support you at the front line to both retain those existing apprentices, progress those on through the endpoint assessments, but importantly, ensure that the numbers don't fall through the floor? A combination of the frameworks being switched off, and of course, we know employers now perhaps won't be looking to recruit as many apprentices as they'd planned maybe just a few weeks ago.
Yes, and I think you've hit on a real issue that we're experiencing hour by hour at the moment of apprentices that are currently on programme, who a lot of them who have been furloughed, now receiving redundancy notices.
Right.
So when you look at the the outcome of data and how we retain apprentices and how we support them, this is going to be particularly challenging for us, where we will be doing everything that we can to work with these apprentices to continue their learning and to help them through the redundancy process, which will be the first time that they've experienced something like this as an employee, whilst keeping them motivated to continue with their learning as much as we can do from either remotely or a college base.
Yeah.
And then for us to try and secure them another position to move to in order that they can complete their apprenticeships.
Sure.
So for me, in terms of support, I would like to see a lot more incentives. I much prefer incentives rather than the stick approach.
Sure.
Incentives for employers not to jettison their apprentices at this time, and whether that's some form of continuance of the furlough scheme, so that apprentices can be retained until they've completed their apprenticeships.
Okay. Well, I know that government ministers, senior policymakers, all the various people in the quangos, they do listen to this show, Tracy. So hopefully they'll take those really, really practical recommendations on board. We're also dedicating a whole show tomorrow to the idea of a youth guarantee this September. Tracy Matthews, Head of Apprenticeships at Milton Keynes College. Louise Doyle, who's a quality expert at SDN, Strategic Associate. Thanks so much for joining Skills World this evening.
Well, thank you very much for having us on.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
I try this a new way. I'm gonna show you the tricks that I know. I'm getting tired of talking, and I need more of a show right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other. Every day, I won't stop like the others. I will stay. 'Cause now is the right time, and I'm feeling alright. I'm playing your game like I know I can win right now. You got me up tonight, 'cause loving you is like I'm walking a tightrope so high. I won't be turning around, no, I won't be turning around. I'll do it on my way. I'm gonna show you what I'm going through, get you out of your comfort zone, 'cause I need more of the truth right now. It's time that you made your mind up, 'cause lately all it ever does is change. Feels like we're only talking, going round and around, back around. I will fight like no other. Every day, I won't stop like the others. I will stay. 'Cause now is the right time, and I'm feeling alright. I'm playing your game like I know I can win right now. You got me up tonight, 'cause loving you is like I'm walking a tightrope so high. I won't be turning around, no, I won't be turning around.
That's Walking on a Tightrope. Mind Me with Mia Furman. Bit of a dual act there. Now look, to help me close the show and tonight's big debate around the future of apprenticeships, quality and funding, who better, frankly, than Mark Dorr, the boss of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Tom.
Thanks for joining me. Now, I believe you've actually been listening to the show tonight, so I was going to ask you what your reaction was to the Minister's announcement today that apprenticeship frameworks will not be extended beyond July.
I think it's one of her bad decisions, actually,
Right.
Quite a terrible decision. And, the line of quality, and it's all, you've known for since October 18's used quite a lot. But as we know, a lot of standards have taken time to develop. Many have only just come in, if they're there at all, in some areas. And even where there are standards, there's not a total map to frameworks. Now, we're not saying don't get rid of frameworks, but to do it in the middle of this crisis where, if you talk to some really good providers who were preparing to move to standards who'd only just come along, they needed their employers to understand the standards as much as themselves because they're part of the delivery. And there's not a chance that was going to happen during this crisis. So I think it's a big mistake. And actually, it's just going to make delivering apprenticeships even harder over the next 6 months. Why would you make that decision?
I mean, it certainly is going to affect the numbers, which are already tanking anyway, even before COVID-19 hit us just 8 or 9 weeks ago. I mean, the Minister did make the comment, though, that 75% of apprenticeships are already on standards. And I think there's been some analysis, actually, by you that suggested that ITPs on the whole have been ahead of the game with standards compared to, say, for example, FE colleges. I mean, is it going to really impact then, do you think, on the numbers, on the volumes in a big way?
Yeah, I mean, it's sector by sector. Some will be fine, some won't. And in construction, and I was with our hair and beauty providers today, where again there's a new standard, and they're embracing it, but there's no way their employers can be prepared to deliver that in time. So it's not. It will affect big numbers in certain areas, generally at the lower levels as well. And we've still not got through the business admin level 2 argument. That's had to go on hold. And who is it that's been arguing the most for that? The health authorities, care, local authorities, and they'll be ones that are probably going to be recruiting the soonest again. We've just taken away the first step. So it's I get the decision in terms of removing frameworks, but it's the wrong timing. And actually, it isn't listening to the employers. It's nothing to do with the providers here. It's not listening to the employers and what they need.
Yeah, indeed. Well, there's been a similar debate about whether T-levels should go ahead given the collapse in likely placements. But again, there's a determination in sanctuary buildings just to plough on. Now, one area where I know you and your ITP members have been sort of very disappointed with the government is the handling of the so-called supply relief programme, and ESFA have not provided the kind of continued financial support that they've given, for example, to FE colleges. What can you share with us tonight about where things are with, for example, your legal challenge to government on that point?
Yeah, and remember there are lots of funding streams. We've had AEB, adult ed, we've had non-levy. As the Minister likes to point out, only 22% applied, but actually, many had cash reserves like good, prudent businesses would have that they're eating up over these 3 months. Yeah. And so, not like the grant-funded organisations, didn't matter what cash reserves they had, they got support. We've had ESF today, all looks great until you find out that it's just a loan and you've got to pay it back through more delivery in the future. So actually don't see many going through with that. We're still waiting for study programmes. And then the biggie, obviously, is the levy apprenticeships. And we obviously wrote the letter. We've had a reply. We're still in discussion with the lawyers about what to do next, because to be honest, it's not, as well Tom, it's not about legal battles. Court experience with the government. No, it's not about legal battles. It's about saying, look, there's common sense here, and this is what is being said. For God's sake, why aren't you applying common sense? And actually, this is about maintaining a capacity in the centre, in the sector, to deliver in the future. And the government are going to decimate the capacity in this sector, and then look around and say, oh, what's happened to all of that? It won't be talking about quality. We'll be talking about any delivery.
Yeah. I mean, you made a very good point at the very start of this whole crisis, where you pointed out that this wasn't about bailouts. This wasn't about asking for extra money. This was all really about just ensuring that continuity of money into the system, which obviously they agreed in relation to grant funding of FE colleges. In Wales, as we know, which is a different system, but in the 8 devolved areas, the combined mayoral authorities, they obviously took their own decisions around the adult skills budget. I mean, do you just think we just got off to a really, really bad start where, frankly, if the government had taken a more principled view, which says, you know what, we've got this post-16 ecosystem, it's made up of all sorts of different entities and players, we were going to spend this money anyway on adults, on apprenticeships and on young people. We're just going to carry on getting the money out the door until such time as we get the economy back working again, and obviously we can claw back money in the future if, for example, endpoint assessments don't take place or people don't complete their training. I mean, do you think, just a missed opportunity there right at the very beginning?
Totally. I mean, we've all talked about everyone working really hard and everyone trying to do their best, and I get all of that. But at the end of the day, our job here is to say what's happening on the ground and the impact on the providers and the apprentices. What I think's probably, you could say, the most disappointing is the department hasn't been the advocate for apprentices and apprenticeship providers. It's been telling them why they're not going to get support. And you would have hoped with such a headline policy for the government, they actually would have been shouting and screaming about, if we're going to keep this going, if we're going to drive the quality, we need these quality providers. And let's remember, I don't like people putting down providers. 80% are good and better delivering apprenticeships, which is phenomenal given the changes that have taken place.
Yeah.
If you want to maintain that, we need the funding. So why that they weren't screaming and shouting on our side rather than against the sector, I just don't understand.
Okay. Look, ALP's been considering what happens, of course, post the immediate crisis of the pandemic. ONS figures this week suggest a really scary spike in both youth and adult employment of the likes we probably haven't seen, since the 1930s and the Great Depression. I mean, just tell us what you think, the range of policy ideas, and I think you've put some to ministers already, that could really support that investment and employment and skills during recovery.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing a paper over the next couple of days for people to see. And it's very much, it's not saying give us 2 billion here or expand this adult program or whatever. It's saying we need a framework to work to, a matrix almost, because this recession isn't going to be like others. We're going to have some sectors that are going to be decimated, hospitality, retail, and will take a long time to pick up, lots of unemployment there, and others that will start picking up quicker, whether it's garden centres or care or whatever else. So we've come up with 5 elements, which are the challenges in each sector by sector and the opportunities, what the individuals require in terms of support, the skills needs. So what individuals there are, the skills needs, how you deliver and assess, and then the programme support and funding. And we've got some key points under each of those headings.
Okay, well, it's great that we'll be having a debate as a sector, and I think you've got these ideas to share in the next couple of days. I think that just sort of helps focus everybody on the future and getting out of this crisis. Mark Dorr, thanks very much for coming on the show. I mean, I hope you'll come on again very soon and talk to us more about what your plans are. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Tom.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
So that was Mark Dorr there from the ALP, giving us his perspective, both on today's decisions and what should happen in the future. And it's just great to get him and lots of other sector leaders on the show, uninterrupted and just giving us straight from the horse's mouth what their perspective is on a whole range of issues. So we're going to play out now with Sunwave. This is Only Me and You. But don't forget, folks, tune in to the next episode of Skills World Live tomorrow, when we'll be examining an idea put forward by a group of labour market experts about bringing in a youth guarantee. It's also, of course, that time of week tomorrow when we'll be handing over a whole segment of the show to the Stand Up for Skills campaign led by City and Guild's top boss, Kirsty Donnelly MBE. So please do remember, if you want to be on the show, contact us at skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Thanks as ever to my editor, Gavin O'Mara, and our wonderful digital producer, Ellie Hansen. Skills World Live is an FE News production supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners Programme. Goodbye.
Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/Skills World.